Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to see you. My name is Markus Krah. I'm the Executive Director of the Leo Baeck Institute, which together with Yeshiva University Museum is sponsoring this event this afternoon. You may know that the Leo Baeck Institute has, for almost 70 years, worked to preserve and promote the history of German-speaking Jews. We do this with other Leo Baeck Institutes in Jerusalem and in London. We also have an office in Berlin. And here in New York, we are a proud partner of the Center for Jewish History, where we find ourselves this afternoon. LBI's work does not focus exclusively on the Nazi period or on the Holocaust, but aims to preserve and promote the entirety of the German Jewish experience over 1700 years. But appropriately, a large focus of our work is on the 1930s and 40s and forward, especially on the exilic experience of German Jews in the US. By the way, one plug, Exile is also the title of our award-winning podcast, in which actor-activist Mandy Patinkin narrates the exilic experiences of key protagonists of who we have papers in our collections. I invite you to check this out. It is a really exciting project. So with this mission to preserve and promote German Jewish history, we feel a responsibility to commemorate the anniversary for which the event today takes place. The Washington Principles passed 25 years ago, which were a crucial agreement, a crucial step in the long, often painful, and still ongoing process to find morally appropriate and also practical solutions to the grave problem of Nazi-confiscated art. So I'm very excited that we have assembled such a powerhouse of speakers on this topic. They will be introduced in a moment, but I want to welcome, because I know that he's listening, Ambassador Eizenstat, who was a key architect of the Washington Principles, Karen Heilig, still in the audience, who will come up in a moment, of the Claims Conference, Gabe Goldstein of Yeshiva University Museum, who will also moderate this event, and Felix Klein will soon join us, Germany's Commissioner on Antisemitism and Jewish Life. You see that not all of the participants will be with us in person. Ambassador Eizenstat will give his keynote address via video, and Felix Klein just called me 30 minutes ago that his plane had been late. He had just landed, so he will be hopefully here in 15 or 20 minutes, which is why after my brief words of welcome, I will leave you in the good hands of Gabe Goldstein to fetch Felix Klein when he arrives. Let me briefly introduce, before I turn over to Gabe Goldstein. Gabe is the Director and Chief Curator of the Yeshiva University Museum here in the Center for Jewish History. He has played a leading role in an exhibit on the 70th anniversary of Holocaust reparations, which was presented in the German Parliament. And he also serves on the American Alliance of Museums Advisory Committee on the Nazi-era provenance web portal. So he's in a unique position to bring his experience to the table and to this panel today. Thank you for doing that. I'll turn it over to you, Gabe. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you came out for this important event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcus. On behalf of Yeshiva University Museum, we're very proud to be cooperating with the Leo Baeck Institute this afternoon on this very important program. And I must say, both personally and professionally, over the past 25 years, I've seen and been involved in the impact of the Washington Principles and in the lead up to that creation of that really landmark agreement. I'm really privileged to be able to introduce Ambassador Eizenstat, who, as we heard, is the architect of the Washington Principles. And that really changed the field in terms of Holocaust restitution and recognition, and changed the field in terms of overall provenance awareness and research in the general public and in the art community, whether that's in the commercial art community, the museum community, individual collectors, and the general public. I will be happy to give you further remarks about our other panelists, Felix Klein, who hopefully, as you hear, will be with us soon, and Karen Heilig, who I've been privileged to work with, as you heard, on this Claims Conference project. Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat is currently Senior Counsel at Covington & Burling LLP International Practice, where his work focuses on resolving international business disputes with U.S. and foreign governments around the world. He served in public service under 6 U.S. administrations, from Johnson through today through Biden. Ambassador Eizenstat has held senior positions, key positions, including Chief White House Domestic Policy Advisor to President Carter, U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, Undersecretary of State for Economic, Business, and Agricultural Affairs, and Deputy Secretary of Treasury and Special Representative of the President and Secretary of State on Holocaust issues in the Clinton administration. He served as Special Advisor on Holocaust issues to Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and today it's Tony Blinken. President Biden appointed him as chairman of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, which he helped create with President Carter. He is also a special negotiator for the Jewish claims with the German government on behalf of Holocaust survivors. Much of the renewed interest over the past decades in justice for Holocaust survivors, justice for their families, justice overall, is a result of his leadership in all of these areas. We are very proud to be able to present him with you today for a keynote on the emergence and impact of the Washington Principles. Ambassador Eizenstat, we look forward to your words.
I'm very sorry that I can't be with you personally. I want to applaud Marcus Krah for his leadership of the Leo Baeck Institute, an organization close to my heart, which preserves and highlights the rich history and cultural heritage of the German Jewish community. I also want to recognize my dear friend David Marwell, the distinguished president of the Center for Jewish Studies. Special thanks for organizing this program on the 25th anniversary of the Washington Principles on Nazi-confiscated art. There was nothing inevitable about the Holocaust. It's a tragic example of the worst manifestations of anti-Semitism and racism. A Nazi ideology which targeted Jews as an inferior race, leading one of the most cultured countries in the world to turn on their neighbors. But the Holocaust was also facilitated by the indifference of the world to the fate of European Jewry. The result? In 1939, there were 17 million Jews in a world of 1 billion. Today, with the loss of 6 million Jews, there are only 14.7 million in a world of more than 8 billion. In Germany and throughout Europe, it was also the destruction of the flower of Jewish culture, art, scholarship, and religion. Hitler's original goal was to make Germany Judenrein, free of Jews. He proceeded methodically, step by step, gauging German and world reaction to his gradual disenfranchisement of German Jews. He saw no boycott of the 1936 Olympic Games, even with the 1935 Nuremberg laws. 1938 was the pivotal year when Hitler got clear signals of the world's indifference to the fate of the Jews. The Anschluss with Austria, the Avion Conference called by President Roosevelt to deal with the plight of German Jewish refugees, where the U.S. and other Western nations refused to lift rigid immigration quotas, the annexation of the Sudetenland through the Munich Pact, and then Kristallnacht, a furious pogrom with mass arrests and the torching of 7,500 German Jewish businesses and 1,000 synagogues. While the British instituted the kinder transports as a result, Hitler paid close attention to the reaction of the U.S. government. When asked if he had anything to say about the violence, President Roosevelt said, "No, I think not. It should be handled by the State Department," and said he would not seek to raise the immigration quotas. German propaganda capitalized on this as Goebbels instructed the German press to call out what he called the hypocrisy of the West, taking no action to admit more Jews, despite their criticism of Kristallnacht. And the American Jewish community largely took a low-key approach in pressuring FDR, concerned about prevailing anti-Semitism. The Holocaust was not only the greatest genocide in world history, it was also the greatest theft of property in history, which was not random, but an integral part of the Nazis' plan to eliminate all vestiges of Jewish life in Germany and Europe, root and branch. Homes, businesses, bank accounts, insurance policies, personal professions, and they also worked to death slave laborers to help run the German war effort. Leading German banks and insurance companies became facilitators of the exploitation of Jewish assets. Large numbers of ordinary Germans purchased Jewish assets on the cheap, from pots and pans to costly rugs and furnishings. A significant percentage of the German armed forces was financed by looted Jewish assets. The Allies were aware of the theft of art, and in the 1943 London Declaration called on neutral countries not to trade in art looted by the Nazis, but often to no avail. Courageously, U.S. commanders included curators and art historians embedded as monuments, fine arts, and archives officers, the famous monuments men, to recapture and protect the looted art and the final period of the war. They obtained as many as 100,000 artworks, and pursuant to an order from President Truman, they were cataloged and then returned to their countries of origin, relying on those governments after the war to trace the owners and return the stolen property, but with mixed results. In France, for example, 13,000 were considered heirless and sold at auction. A similar fate occurred in the Netherlands. The full dimensions of the theft, including art, only became known when the wall of silence was breached after the end of the Cold War, as archives in the former Soviet Union and former East Bloc were opened. 4 scholars in the 1990s wrote path-breaking books, and Elizabeth Simpson organized a 1995 Bard Graduate Center conference in New York entitled The Spoils of War. As many as 600,000 artworks and millions of books and religious objects were stolen with the same efficiency, brutality, and scale as the Holocaust itself. Hitler had several thousands of the most valuable paintings that were going to be installed in a Führer museum in his childhood home in Linz, Austria, while the priceless religious and cultural objects were planned for what he called a museum to a dead race in Prague. At the December 1997 London Gold Conference, returning remaining gold bars stolen by the Nazis, I got the British government to reluctantly agree to have a closing panel on looted art, and I then invited the participating countries to come to Washington for a conference devoted exclusively to looted art and cultural objects. My staff, led by J.D. Bindenagel and I, at the State Department, worked for months leading up to the Washington conference to try to build a consensus among the key countries behind principles that had been developed by the Association of Art Museum Directors in the U.S. But key European nations and their museums did not want to part with any of their artworks and resented having American principles imposed on them. So we repackaged those principles into 11 principles that looked different but kept the essential points. Art confiscation by the Nazis should be identified and publicized. Archives should be open and accessible. In establishing that a work of art was confiscated by the Nazis, consideration should be given to unavoidable gaps in light of the circumstances of the Holocaust era. Pre-war owners and their heirs should be encouraged to make claims to Nazi-looted art. They should be taken to achieve a just and fair solution, and if no errors could be found, commissions should be established to assist in addressing ownership issues. Nations were to be encouraged to develop alternative dispute resolution mechanisms to costly litigation to resolve ownership issues. After 3 days of intensive negotiations in Washington, we teetered on the brink of failure. With only a few hours before the closing session, I convened representatives from France, Germany, and Switzerland and assured them that the Washington principles would be voluntary. Each nation could act within the context of their own laws, as we put it. That did it. That made it successful. But critics immediately derided them as useless. They were proven wrong. Philippe de Montebello, head of the Metropolitan Art Museum, said during the conference, "The art world will never be the same on the issue of spoliation of art in the World War II Nazi era. The genie is at last out of the bottle, and no resistance, apathy, or silence can ever fit it back inside again." The Washington principles were not only important in and of themselves in the world of art, but they called worldwide attention to the enormity of the staggering theft that accompanied the genocide. The Washington principles have been transformative, creating a moral and ethical obligation on the holders of Nazi-looted art, which many, though not all, have assumed to return to their rightful owners, or devise other just and fair solutions, like compensation, long-term loans, and other negotiated agreements. Thousands of artworks, books, and Jewish cultural objects have been restituted, or claims have been successfully resolved. 5 nations, Austria, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Britain, created claims commissions to provide a forum for heirs to recover art confiscated from their families. They each published their decisions, and these might eventually create guidelines for just and fair solutions. In June 2009, the Washington Principles were strengthened by the 47-nation Terezin Declaration at the Prague Holocaust-era Assets Conference organized by the Czech Republic. Confiscation was broadened to include forced sales and sales under duress, recognizing many Jews and other Nazi targets were forced to sell their artworks to get funds to pay for exit taxes and visas. Private institutions and individuals, not only public museums, were encouraged to support the Washington Principles, and nations were urged to ensure that their legal systems facilitated just and fair solutions, and that claims were resolved expeditiously on the merits. In 2022, in a conference I also participated in, the Terezin II conference held in Prague, we reaffirmed the Terezin Declaration by 35 countries. The U.S. Congress, on a bipartisan basis, has been particularly supportive. The 2016 HERE Act created a unique 6-year statute of limitations that would only begin when a claimant had reason to know of the Nazis' theft of their family's art. And the 2018 JUST Act, it called on the State Department to report on the implementation of the Terezin Declaration by its 47 endorsing countries. The State Department undertook an exhaustive study and in 2020 reported on the implementation of the Terezin Declaration. Among other things, it found that after a promising start, American museums had begun asserting affirmative defenses to block restitution and looted art in contravention of the Washington Principles, which were to make decisions on the merits, that they were lagging in conducting provenance research and were using antiquated software which complicated the identification of potential Nazi-looted art by claimants. On the 20th anniversary of the Washington Principles, to encourage more art recovery in Germany, I signed a 2018 Memorandum of Understanding with Germany's Federal Commissioner for Culture and Media, Monica Gruters, that quadrupled funds to German museums for provenance research and committed to deny federal subsidies for publicly supported German museums that refused to participate in claims cases for restitution. With the intervention of the U.S. government, the Netherlands reversed the backsliding by their museums and claims commission by ending what they called their balance of interest test, which had allowed Dutch museums to keep Nazi-looted art if its importance to their collection was determined to outweigh the interests of the heirs. We got this reversed. There's also been some progress in Israel, Luxembourg, which recently agreed to a comprehensive restitution program, and Switzerland. Croatia is also moving in the right direction. Christie's and Sotheby's have created full-time staffs to review all art consigned to them to sell or auction that passed through European hands between 1933 and 1945 to be sure that they're not dealing in Nazi-looted art. They will not sell those with suspicious provenance. Christie's alone has resolved over 300 claims. New organizations like the London-based Commission for Looted Art, headed by Ann Weber, were created to represent the victims, to identify, locate, and recover their looted cultural property. And a new Jewish Digital Cultural Recovery Project Foundation was set up in Berlin, developed by the Jewish Claims Conference and the World Jewish Restitution Organization, which will provide an international digital platform for archival documentation, research, and education on the widespread plunder by the Nazis and their allies of Jewish-owned artworks and cultural heritage. France has recently shown commendable leadership, passing a new law permitting the de-accession from their museums of Nazi-looted artworks in state collections. The Commission for the Compensation of Victims of Spoliation was given authority over looted art, and recommendations on restitution now go directly to the Prime Minister's office. In 2022, just last year, the French Senate restituted 15 artworks in its collection, and 5 more artworks have been returned so far this year. The Washington principles have had an unexpected ripple effect as Germany, France, and the Netherlands and other countries are reviewing art and cultural objects confiscated during their colonial period. While much has been accomplished, much remains to be done. We're only at the tip of the iceberg. It's estimated that some 100,000 of the 600,000 paintings and cultural objects which were stolen have never been returned. And for those who do get them back, it can take decades of hard work and expensive work as well. I believe we should undertake a project to develop best practices, drawing on what we've learned in the 25 years since the Washington Principles were adopted. De-accession laws, which bar museums from returning art, should be modified for Nazi-looted art, as the UK did in 2009, and as I indicated, France has recently done. Statutes of limitation should be amended so they're not a bar to recovery. Countries should maintain comprehensive statistics on restitution. Flight goods should be covered by the Washington Principles. After their escape, persecuted persons lost their sources of income, and many survived outside of Germany by selling their artworks under distress. The burden of proof should be on those holding Nazi-confiscated art when evidence is produced by the victims of a theft. We should develop creative options for heirless Nazi-looted art where there are no living heirs. Serbia did this in 2016. We must start with provenance research because without that, recoveries are impossible. Yet, it's a low priority for art museums. The State Department found that in most European countries, too many public and private art museums do not conduct provenance research on their art collections. research that's essential to provide information about potential claims for Nazi-confiscated art. Most of these museums are European Union member states, but the European Commission and European Council have done virtually nothing, in my view, to encourage art restitution. It's time for the European Union to get off the sidelines. A number of key European countries, such as Poland, need to do more. Others, such as Spain and Portugal, need to conduct more provenance research, including to identify art that may have transited their countries during World War II. Russia has done little to follow the Washington principles, despite legislation signed by President Putin following the Washington Conference. We found in our State Department study that Russia has enormous numbers of artworks, library collections, and archives, which their Soviet trophy brigades brought into the USSR from Soviet-occupied Germany as what they called compensatory restitution for the huge losses of cultural property inflicted by the Nazis on Soviet territory. Now, Russia's invasion and aggression against Ukraine has seen a wanton destruction of Ukraine's cultural heritage and massive theft of art from Ukraine, once again in Europe. The function of these 5 European Claims Commissions should be improved, and many more need to be created throughout Europe so that families can recover their looted artworks wherever they reappear. Germany, which has been so courageous and generous in supporting Holocaust survivors, has significantly more to do on art restitution, as indicated by their own art commission. Their commission itself refers to there being a large number of Nazi-looted artworks yet to be returned, saying that the Lost Art database alone lists some 60,000 entries of suspected Nazi-looted art, yet their own commission has ruled on only 23 cases during its entire lifetime. To summarize their commission's own findings, there are no comprehensive statistics in Germany on restitution efforts that have taken place, leading to a perception, a critical perception at that, of Germany's handling of Nazi-looted art worldwide. Their commission can only deal with cases in which both parties agree to participate, but museums are reluctant to do so. Owners or their heirs cannot self-initiate cases. Provenance research on collections, which is essential to art recovery, lags. Only 12% of German museums have done provenance research on their collections, and owners of private collections in Germany have done next to nothing. When provenance research is done, it's done by the museums themselves rather than an independent body, as exists in Austria, France, and the Netherlands. The German Art Commission has no legal status, and its decisions are not binding on the parties. Their commission powerfully concluded, and I quote, "The lack of a legal basis for an institution that is to decide on the restitution of cultural assets lost as a result of Nazi persecution in the country of the perpetrators is inappropriate and insufficient," end quote. And correcting the deficiencies in their operation, they concluded, must now be done as a matter of urgency in order to silence criticism at home and above all abroad that the Federal Republic of Germany is neither sufficiently able nor really willing to make adequate reparations for Nazi injustice with regard to cultural property. The coalition agreement of Chancellor Scholz's German government promised many improvements in this field of restitution, but they note, the Commission itself, none of these points has been implemented, end quote. Germany's own advisory committee recommended such legislation. In short, as Germany has been a leader for decades in Holocaust restitution, compensation, education, and memory, which is embedded in their legislation, it should become a leader as well in art restitution, with legislation covering public museums, private institutions, and individuals holding Nazi-confiscated art, enabling its commission to have a legal basis, to make binding, enforceable decisions, to allow heirs to self-initiate claims, and to have an independent body to do provenance research. The Washington Principles and the Terezin Declaration demonstrate the central importance of continued leadership by the U.S. government with the same bipartisan support and zeal we've shown over the past 25 years. The Washington Principles have had a lasting impact beyond anything we could have imagined at the time. They're a reminder of the importance of striving for justice. This battle must go on. Thank you.
Our thanks initially to Ambassador Eizenstat for giving us really a masterful introduction to the process that made the Washington Principles come about, and then a survey of their impact and evolution over the past 25 years, and then a very important call to action for what still needs to happen. On behalf of Leo Baeck Institute and Yeshiva University Museum, it's my great privilege to welcome both Karen Heilig and Dr. Felix Klein here for the next part of our conversation. Ambassador Eizenstat will join us as well as we consider this. Karen Heilig serves as the Claims Conference Assistant Executive Vice President and General Counsel. As a child of Holocaust survivors, she decided to leave corporate law to pursue the historic mission of the Claims Conference. Since 1999, she's participated in negotiations between the Claims Conference and the German government, the Austrian government, and negotiations on unpaid Holocaust-era insurance policies. Dr. Felix Klein has served as the federal government commissioner for Jewish life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism since May 2018. From 1994 to 1996, he trained for the German Higher Foreign Service at the Federal Foreign Office Training Center in Bonn. In 2001, he received a doctorate from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland with a dissertation on the topic in the area of family law. He began his diplomatic career with service in South America, in Cameroon, and in Italy. He has held various posts at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin from 2007 to 2008, and he serves lastly as the Special Representative for Relations with Jewish organizations and issues relating to anti-Semitism. Outside of work, he continues this passion and interest, serving as a member of Berlin Diplomatic String Quartet, which focuses on performing works by Jewish composers. So to begin the conversation, I'd like to raise a couple of questions, each of you from your own perspective. So Karen, can you start by giving us an idea about the Claims Conference's role in this, representing the international Jewish community, and bringing that voice into this conversation?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to contribute to this very important discussion on this really groundbreaking anniversary that we have at the moment. The Claims Conference and the WJRO have been very involved in the issue for many years, perhaps in two main areas.
WJRO.
The World Jewish Restitution Organization. The Claims Conference focuses on issues with Germany and Austria, and World Jewish Restitution Organization focuses on restitution issues with other countries in Europe. So one of the two main areas that we have been involved in is, as Ambassador Eizenstat said, and it's true, provenance research is really the key, because it's important that people know to research what's happened, and for that it's really critical that there be tools. So one of the things that the Claims Conference and the WJRO has focused on is bringing information that is relevant to provenance research to the fore. I'm just going to give you perhaps 2 or 3 practical examples. The main entity in Nazi Germany that was responsible for the confiscation of Jewish art and cultural property was the ERR. It's Einsatzraub Reichsleiche Rosenberg by Alfred Rosenberg. And there are over 400,000 pages of records. The Germans kept very meticulous records of this. And for over 15 years, the Claims Conference and WJRO has been involved in digitizing these records to help researchers. They were spread all throughout Europe, and very luckily, one of the first places we did the digitization was in Kiev. 140,000 pages were digitized there, and very luckily we moved them from a Russian server a few years ago to somewhere in the West. So that process is almost finished, with the last records being done in Lithuania. Another example is we have produced a list, which is ongoing, of 2,000 Jewish collectors in Europe. So if someone is doing provenance research, you can go to the internet and look up in many countries if they're sort of as a signal, a red flag for someone. Yet another example, we did a handbook for people working in museums on Jewish ceremonial objects, mainly silver and other work, to help provenance researchers. Perhaps one last example, we are tracing the fate of Jewish libraries. So when someone has a book for sale or to acquire, you can look, they often have a stamp. We have already over all the Jewish libraries by individuals and institutions in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands is coming online soon. So again, to help with provenance research. And provenance research needs funding, and it needs to be independent. And I think that was one of also the points, that it's really critical to have people trained to do it and to have resources. So that's one of the areas that we've been very much working on. And the other area is really advocacy, really pushing for many of the developments, both historical, like changes and acceptance, like Ambassador Eizenstat mentioned. It's critical that the original conference talked about confiscated, and we all know that Jews had to sell their property under duress, really to expand the definitions, and also to point out and push for changes. We've been very active in Germany, and I think one of the points that Ambassador Eizenstat made was really that we really believe that there need to be some changes. Germany has been I've been involved in negotiations for nearly 25 years on issues of compensation and restitution, and there have been amazing developments and really a commitment, bipartisan commitment to survivors for going back 70 years. And that's continued, but we think that in the area of art restitution, there's more to be done. I'll just give you one example. There is a famous case, I'm sure you know, of a Picasso called Malam Soler. It's in the Bavarian State Museum. It is clear that it was owned by a Jewish owner, Paul von Mendelssohn Bartholomew, and the question is, it was sold in 1935. There's a whole issue whether it was for sale, wasn't. The Limbach Commission, the German government commission, should the heirs that wanted to take it to the commission, the Bavarian State Museum has refused. They said, no, we're not participating. And we believe it's critical that people have to go to a commission, the decisions be binding as a result of the commission, and that there is an appeal to a court, and the court is of experts that can really deal with this. So that we think that there's a lot of improvement. We think, we admire what Germany has done. It's really important, and especially in the areas of compensation and restitution and helping survivors. But we think that there's room, and I think the coalition agreement, that there's room for changes and developments.
Thank you, Karen. Felix, we're delighted that you managed to get here just in time, despite any delays in flights that we all experience these days. So you've heard there's been some question about what's next for Germany. I wonder if you can give us some overview of what's happened recently and where you see this going.
Well, of course, the whole story of restitution is really terrible and a disaster. And really, as government commissioner for Jewish life and the fight against anti-Semitism, I really think it is shameful the way Germany has dealt with the issue over the past years after 1945. This is totally unacceptable. The reasons are manifold, and this is not the topic of today's conference, but I think the ground problem was that to leave the whole issue to the families, to the victims, and the former owners and their families and their descendants, and it was never really accepted that this restitution issue is a public affair, a public issue. That because the aim we should all focus is that we, with restitution, a lawful state of affairs is being re-established. This should have been the approach towards the whole issue. And fortunately, though, I mean, Ambassador Eizenstat has said the issue and also explained the whole issue. At least, I mean, we have the Washington Principles, the Terezin Declaration, non-binding documents, but at least there's something. And it has already been mentioned that the current coalition agreement at last, I mean, has acknowledged that there is a problem and that the current state of affairs is not satisfactory at all. The Limbach Commission in the past 20 years has only decided on 23 cases. This is really, nothing. And so what's next? That's your question. I think there are two, or maybe three points I would like to make. First of all, you have already said provenance research. This is the key. And at least, I mean, there I can say, because I prepared myself a little bit. In the past 15 years, at least, the federal government has provided a total of some 101 million euros for provenance research. And since 1998, nearly 7,500 cultural objects and 24,500 books held in museums in Germany have been identified as Nazi-confiscated. So this has to go on. And it shouldn't be only up to the museums to finance that and to organize that. Really, the government, it's a public issue. The government, federal government, should continue with the financing provenance research. The second thing, and Ambassador Eizenstat has mentioned that as well, the commission itself, the advisory commission, has to be reformed. It has to be possible to put a case in front of the commission without the consent of the other party. And you've just mentioned this case of the famous Picasso, Madame Soler, and it's not understandable at all the way the state of Bavaria is dealing with this issue. So the commission itself has to be reformed, and the president of the commission, former president of the Federal Constitutional Court, Mr. Papier, has suggested, and I think this is a very good suggestion, that it will become, that this commission will become really a body that also issues, that is like an authority that can issue papers, or that it can issue decisions that then afterwards could be theoretically challenged at courts in Germany. That would be really a major step forward. And I think we should talk about reforming the commission. And the third point I would like to make is, of course, the ideal state would be a restitution law in the Federal Republic of Germany, but not only that will handle all the cases that are in the federal government's possession also. We need a law that would also include the 16 Länder and also the local museums and so on, because because this is a major difference between the situation in Germany and the one in Austria. In Austria, I would say 98% of all looted art cases are in the possession of the federal government and the federal museums, whereas in Germany it is very dispersed, and this is complicated, of course, to convince 16 Länder also to pass this law. It has to be, and would need the consent of the Bundesrat, our second chamber. And I know, though, that talks are being done now, because before coming here, I actually talked to the federal government's Minister for Culture and Media, Mrs. Roth, and her staff, and they assured me, and here I have a paper here that was approved by her, that she says that the reform will make it possible for claimants of cultural property to appeal to the advisory commission without first needing their consent. This is the aim, and she told me that the talks have been very far. Unfortunately, though, I can't really tell you the real state of affairs because I'm not participating in the talks that comprise also the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Finance. But I'm very happy that at least something is to be done. I mean, our current parliamentary period is already in its second half. If we want to pass a law or change the status of the Commission, things have to be done now, because we don't have so much time left. But this is at least what I am told, and also that the statute of limitations on claims should be waived under certain conditions. And the right to information, this is also what she told me here, the right to information will be guaranteed by law. So this is very important that we need transparency in the whole issue, of course. That's the first step. So I think the situation is still it's not satisfactory at all, but things are underway.
Thank you. That is definitely encouraging with some concerns, clearly. If I can for a minute, I'd like to just mention the impact of the Washington Principles on, as I said in my remarks at the beginning, and as we've heard in Ambassador Eisenstat's remarks, on the art community generally, particularly on the museum community. And looking back, I remember when I was in grad school, people didn't know the word provenance. It wasn't common parlance. And in the kind of rarefied world of art history, it was rarefied. And provenance meant that it had prestigious history of ownership. And you cared about provenance because it once was in the collection of Madame de Pompadour, or it was in some, English country house, the equivalent of Downton Abbey. It wasn't that anyone thought that provenance might be an issue of legal title. No one thought to question museums' legal title. No one thought to collection legal title at auction houses. It was very rare that such issues were ever raised. Now, and in the past decades, 25 years, nothing is in a collection, nothing is acquired newly without thorough research. At the commercial level, as we heard, at the major auction houses, at the minor auction houses as well, certainly at every museum of every scale. And also we look and are encouraged to find new solutions. And I've worked for 15 years at the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, which surprisingly has a very strong collection for people in New York of old masters and early paintings. And they were the first major restitution case in 2000, ironically, a Lucas Cranach Virgin and Child, an important early modern German painting, was restituted. But what happened was they made, and this is in 2000, this is literally 23 years ago, just after the agreement. They made an agreement with the original owners from whom it was stolen and confiscated, and came to a solution where the original owners were compensated, but the original owners agreed to a compensation which allowed it to stay within the museum's collection and stay on public view, owned by the state of North Carolina. North Carolina Museum of Art is the first state art museum in America. So it really had a role in terms of kind of paving a road forward. And we are the heirs to this in the general community and in the arts community. And I think as we all know, and as Ambassador Eizenstat commented, this is no longer true only about Nazi-era art confiscation and restitution. Now all material culture, all art, certainly antiquities, it's in the news all the time, certainly material that has left various countries under colonial rule and is being restituted and returned. Also, in terms of America, what's called NAGPRA, the Native American Grave Repatriation Act, which looked at sacred objects in indigenous communities and their return, has really been part of this conversation. So we are just all more aware and sensitive, trying to find solutions, trying to do new research. And I will agree that from the museum standpoint, and certainly for American museums, we want to do this. We need training, and we need staffing, and we need funding for staffing. There has been funding that's come to European institutions for provenance staffing. That's far fewer, and if existent at all, in North American museums, and it's a real challenge. So to do the right thing, we have to have resources. And we all know that, and I look to governmental agencies and the Claims Conference, et cetera. to help make that happen. But really, the Washington Principles, as Philippe de Montebello said and as Ambassador Eizenstat commented, it all changed. The genie's out of the bottle, and we are now in a moment, a generation of more awareness and more sensitivity, and at a moment, at this very moment, of increased concerns about anti-Semitism, which is kind of interesting in terms of looking at this storyline. Ambassador Eizenstat, do you have something to add after our two speakers and my comments?
I think that what Sharon and Felix and you have added is very important. I'm very encouraged by what Felix indicated he hoped will happen in Germany. It's so ironic that Germany, which clearly has been inspiration. I mean, I negotiated a war with the German government in a written person, going back to the slave labor negotiations during the Clinton administration, and insurance, and then with the Jewish Claims Conference on annual negotiations. Just tens of billions of dollars of compensation, and museums, lessons of the Holocaust. One of the most important things, Felix, that the German government has done in our most recent negotiations, which Karen has been a key part of, along with Greg Schneider and our team in the Claims Conference, has been Holocaust education. Germany has agreed now to over 150 million euros of worldwide Holocaust education to 2027. And Professor Counsel, you just said, at a time of rising anti-Semitism, declining knowledge of the Holocaust, and increased distortion and minimization. So this is very welcome. And with all of that, it's such an oddity that this one area of art restitution Germany has lagged behind, according to its own commission. And the recommendations that commission made, which is to give itself legal status, binding agreements to allow claimants to self-initiate, to have more funds for programmatic research. All of these things were, in general terms, part of the coalition agreement that Chancellor Scholz had at the beginning of his administration. So together with what all of you have said, and in particular Felix, it would be very encouraging if this legislation could be passed, and all the other laws that Germany has done on the Holocaust issues have been put and embodied in a legal structure. This should be as well. Even Stolpersteins, there are 40,000 of these plaques that have been put outside of Jewish homes and businesses, so people know that they were confiscated. So all of this thing has been done. Now we can come full circle and get the restitution of art taken care of, the restitution in general. And I'm really encouraged by what Felix was saying. I hope that the government, and I hope, frankly, that Claudia Roth, who succeeded Monica Gruders as the head of the State Secretary for Culture and the media, will follow through as well. It should be a bipartisan issue in Germany, as it has been when they approve our annual negotiations. In our latest negotiations in May of this year, we had an agreement for 2024 of 1.2 billion euros. 1.2 billion euros for home care, for social services, for special allowances, for the poorest of the poor, and for Holocaust education. So now let's get this piece done and get it done properly. And I'm really appreciative of the Legal Tech Institute of highlighting the need for this.
Thank you so much.
I think we also have to appreciate the Leo Baeck Institute sort of was personally involved. They had a case, I got permission to be able to mention it, where they actually had a book that came into their possession, and it happened to be confirmed that this was a book that had come originally from the Prague Jewish Library, and it was actually restituted, was returned by Leo Baeck to the Prague Jewish Library. So it just shows that this issue comes everywhere. It goes to your point that people who are not expecting it come into contact with the issue. And the other thing is, I think that's very valuable, is that we can use this whole issue of looted art, looted cultural property as a part of Holocaust education. I think there's a sort of also where there is a painting that has, where in the case, for example, where it was left in the museum, I think there should be sort of a plaque that explains what happens, and that's one example, but it should be everywhere. I think when someone goes to see the painting and sees what happened to this painting, it was owned by a Jewish family, it was taken from them, the family survived, the family didn't survive, what happened, that whole history can be integrated, and I think it's very powerful, another method of Holocaust education. So I think there are many, many layers to this issue. One is obviously an issue of justice for the families, but there are many other ways to view these issues.
I think you're right, and then that's become normalized and something that we're proud of, I think, as institutions and as a broader community. So literally, I wanted to look up the Kranach to make sure I had it right, and I took up my phone and I plugged in, I know NCMA Kranach, and it came up, and I opened up the entry, and there was the full information on the restitution and the original ownership. And I recall that Central Synagogue for a long time had a Judaica collection and museum, and they decided that they were no longer going to continue that, and they were going to place the material elsewhere. And then in the research on the collection that hadn't happened before, an object, a Hanukkah lamp, seasonal, was restituted to the family. And that information only emerged because that became a new norm. Ambassador Eizenstat, please.
Yes, I'd like to just say one other thing, and that is the Washington Principles have demonstrated what voluntary international principles can do when they're backed with U.S. leadership, the leadership of key countries, and when they have a strong moral and ethical foundation. Again, when we first negotiated these, they were provided because they were voluntary. We've now shown how the art world has changed, as 18 months ago. There's predicted it would, how you yourself, Professor, have indicated. But it's an important lesson, even in international law, that sometimes things that are not embedded in international law become so forceful that countries want to embed them into domestic laws. That's what we hope Germany will do. Austria has done so. Was the leader 20 years ago. It was really the first country to adopt, in effect, the Washington Principles in their legal structure. And now if Germany will do it, it's simply powerful city.
I think you're right. It really prompted an attitudinal shift.
Yeah, I think one point is important, and Stuart, you have mentioned it. It is not only like provenance research and this whole issue, an issue of restitution. I think it is also now what we do here. What we do here plays a central role in the culture of remembrance, of course, because the information yielded by provenance research brings to light the human lives, of course, being behind the individual objects, make it possible to honor those lives. And I think it is very important to directly link provenance research and the restitution issue with Holocaust education. And since we all know it's terrible, I mean, the memory is getting less and less in the younger generation, so we need to find ways to teach the Holocaust in that way, and I think it can be presented in a good way when you tell the history of a painting or so, and present the history of the family behind it. This is very important, and we should have a parallel structure also being set up for this issue.
I'd like to invite us to have a conversation with the audience here. If people have questions or comments, we have microphones on the side. Or is there someone who can pass them around? I'm a little blinded.
Everybody knows about Hermann Göring decorating Karrenball. But my question is, were there any other people in the hierarchy in Germany that took as much artwork as Göring, and how much of it filtered down to the local level where people in the military, whatever, were confiscating Jewish art? Is there any breakdown upon about who took the artwork?
Well, I'm not an expert in that field, but of course, some lists were done, of course, and the U.S. Army after 1945 confiscated, of course, they went into Goering's premises. There was the big project for the museum Adolf Hitler wanted to found in Linz, and all these works are, of course, in a catalog, and there the provenance research is pretty well documented, I would say. I think, but there's not enough transparency at all, of course. We still have a big work in front of us, and I think the important thing would be also to oblige museums today to do provenance research, to create transparency.
And also, I think it's also very important that we talk about museums in Germany, they're mainly public museums. In America, it's pretty much most museums that we know, the Met and MoMA, they're all private entities. They're all private museums, except for the Smithsonian, perhaps. But in Europe, it's very important. At the moment, much of the framework that's being discussed only covers public museums. But for example, I know just because it's been in the news, we all heard about the Heidi Horton and her collection that was sold at Christie's. But she's actually located in Austria, but there is a private, that's an example of a private institution that really has to do a lot of provenance and all the private institutions need to do it. And the other thing that I think that long-term would be very helpful for provenance research is the digitization of records of dealers. You could take out certain sort of private information, but it's very important for somebody, there's a lot of pieces to be able to find what happens. It's a lot of different pieces. Part of it is the ERR records that I mentioned at the beginning, but there's also many other pieces of information that we really need to digitize and put out there on the internet so that people can do provenance research. And again, if museums, public or private, do it, then there has to be funding for it. And there's also an argument, a little bit of an argument is who should be doing the research, because it's a little bit like, you know, the fox watching the chicken coop, you know what I mean? To which extent does a museum research its own articles, you know what I mean? Should it be done by a private entity? Because the museum, you could argue, has a conflict of interest, right? Because what happens if they find something? Does that mean, you know, they're going to have to reveal it, and that means they may lose the object? So you have a difficult situation when museums do it, because what will be the outcome of the museum doing their provenance research? You know what I mean? So there's also an argument that the provenance research should be done by independent entities. And one of the recommendations was, I think, that the Commission in Germany wanted to be able to do its own, doesn't at the moment, that they should be able to do its own independent research. That's obviously a very important sort of aspect of this whole thing.
Right. Interestingly, museums making new acquisitions after the Washington Principles and thereafter, hopefully, use outside sources. I kind of say it's like a kosher certification agency, right? It's basically what we use, and we will use the Art Loss Register or others, and we wouldn't consider purchasing something and adding it to our collection, or even accepting a donation of a work without getting that hechsher, without getting that kosher certification that the provenance is appropriate. But once it's already has been in the collection since 1951, we don't turn generally to an outside agency, and that could obviously allow for a more neutral, unbiased analysis and greater information, and that's important. I will just respond to the question. We know there was plundering and booting at every level, huge amounts of works, and we kind of concentrate on the Picasso and the Klimt, but there were obviously lots of very precious objects at the middle level and middle high, which also moved out. We know of trains filled with goods that moved, et cetera, at certain points. We have some of that documented, lots of it we don't. And the other larger piece of the kind of high art, more expensive art with that is the price tag, is the degenerate art. So art that was seen to be against Nazi principles, which then was forced sale, which was seized and sold to support the Nazi movement and Nazi government, but was not kept for Nazi collections. So there's and that group is also very well documented. Other questions or comments? Please.
I just, I studying German history sometimes and then realize that all the artists, when the government shows up as Nazi, they just confiscated art. So that means it's not the collector, paying money and buying from the artist, but it's just the government's job that, policeman has to take the paintings away from artists. And another thing that I want to mention is, the budget is very tight now, so, I think it's important to support the artists at our generations, rather than, maybe, paying lots of money for computer, creating some digitalized arts and maybe digital printing also, but, that's like additional, like a low priority budget, I think, compared to the supporting artists.
There are many cultural artworks that are looking at this experience, and I think that's one of the ways that they can add to the commemoration and remembrance process. And certainly art about art is a fascinating way for us to be doing that. Please. Can we wait 1 second so we can all hear you?
How is what is being learned being shared in a way that could become part of a curriculum at a university or even for a younger learner?
This is an interesting question. Most of the work that's been done, the tools that we've done, are on the internet, right? I think the interesting question is, how do we take those tools present those tools and tell people about those tools within the community that is teaching those who work in the museum world? I assume that many people in the museum, there are associations of American museums, which you're part of, and of European museums, and those sort of professional bodies are well aware of the different resources available. I'm not sure how else.
Yeah, I think provenance research now is a staple of kind of training in these areas, in art history and in museum approaches, museum studies, etc., and is seen as a basic. I think the storyline of restitution of art is also now, I think, involved in university curricula. I think it's a subject of study. I'm intrigued. You said, like, how to let it be into younger audiences, and I think I recall, but I think it's opportunity to do this for youth audiences. I think it's good. It's a good story. I think I recall seeing something done in animation or in first-person kind of young adult novels.
Film. I think there would be
children's books.
There'd be a good opportunity for someone to make a sort of a young person's version of something like the monument, not the Monuments Men itself, but something that it was appealing to young audiences. One of the things that I found is that we've got to reach young people in what that speaks to them, whether it's social media.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that these are great films or were key learning opportunities, but Hollywood coverage of this storyline, right, the Klimt painting and the Monuments Men, certainly brings the storyline into the public eye and increases it as a mode of awareness and Holocaust remembrance.
A class attends a class goes on a field trip, for example.
Please, Ambassador Eizenstat.
If I may, first, I share another foundation called the Define Requiem Foundation. Actually had a concert in Berlin recently in honor of the Jewish prison chorus, Eizenstat. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to develop a children's book on the whole issue of art and music during the Holocaust that would appeal to young people. Second, in effect, there is a profession now that did not exist before the Washington Principles, and that is provenance researchers. These are now highly skilled people who help museums with the provenance research. And Karen is quite right. One of the things that would be very important, and it's done in France, it's done in the Netherlands, it's done in Austria, and it should be done in Germany, is not have the museums do the provenance research, but have it done by an independent body that it doesn't have a conflict of interest in working for the museum. But in terms of the education for young people, Karen mentioned this foundation that I is working on. We desperately need to find ways to interest young people in the Holocaust, and and not be looked back, but teaching them the lessons of how that applies to today's world.
Any further questions or comments? Yes?
Does restitution track the public opinion on restitution in Germany? Does it track with anti-Semitism? When anti-Semitism goes up, restitution favoring goes down? I mean, where are we now? Because it's my understanding that Berlin is a cosmopolitan city, but when you get outside of Berlin, anti-Semitism and right-wing politics are burgeoning in Germany.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that there's a direct relation between restitution cases and the rise of anti-Semitism and the situation of it, because the reasons for expressing anti-Semitism are so manifold that there are different reasons for this now. Since October 7th, for instance, the Federal Police Office has registered more than 3,500 crimes, hate crimes, in regard to the conflict, most of them being anti-Semitic. But this doesn't have anything to do with our issue, because this form of anti-Semitism is emanating from Muslim communities, basically, and there we see actually the failures of our integration policy, and because many of them, of those people who commit these crimes, do have already German passports, and then you can't expel them at all. So we really have to do something about it. And fortunately, this is maybe one of the few positive sides of this issue, is that we can talk about this form of anti-Semitism coming from Muslims in our political debate without being too emotional, without triggering a debate that all of that is a populist, very right-wing thing. Now we can talk about it, and Chancellor Scholz and also our Minister of the Interior have addressed the issue. We have to talk to the Muslim communities, to the mosque communities, and to Turkish communities. Unfortunately, President Erdogan, with his unacceptable comments on Israel right now, and on calling Hamas a resistance organization, really has really exacerbated the situation, because the big parts of the Turkish community in Germany, more or less, I would say 60-65%, are supporters of President Erdogan, and what he says in Ankara has a direct effect on what happens in Germany. And we have to talk about the whole issue of how mosques are organized from the Turkish state. We have to talk about this whole system, and one of the few positive things, I repeat myself, is that we are addressing these issues now, because we see that there is a problem.
I just wanted to say one point. As far as we're concerned, and I'm sure Ambassador Eizenstat will agree with me, that the Claims Conference, the support for Holocaust compensation and restitution, and the support for survivors is as strong as ever. It's bipartisan, cross-party, and I think that there has been no diminution at all. If anything, it's as strong and as forceful as ever.
I certainly saw that when we did the exhibition.
May I just say on this that the people with whom we negotiate in Germany, generally with the finance ministry, the so-called Wiener Metal, most of the people with whom we negotiate weren't even born during World War II and all, yet they still feel a moral and ethical obligation. And I find that really quite inspirational, that they, after all these years, still feel that heavy responsibility to do everything they can so that survivors live their final years in dignity.
So on that note, and thank you, I want to thank all of our speakers for this afternoon. I think it was really an amazing achievement to be able to look back, and an amazing achievement. And I thank Ambassador Eizenstat not only for the keynote, but really as the architect of these Washington principles. And they really show us how we can make things work. We can make things better. We have where to go. But 25 years later, we've seen a drastic change in attitude and achievement in this area, something that wasn't happening, wasn't recognized. And as we say, it has to do with doing the right thing in terms of restitution and compensation, but doing the right thing broadly also in terms of Holocaust commemoration and remembrance, and that those can work hand in hand. So I salute you in this achievement over 25 years and beyond, and I thank both the German government and the Claims Conference and all of you for thinking about this with us today. Thank you.